on the press plane to Otis Air Force Base in Massachusetts. We landed, but on the flight, I noticed one thing peculiar, and that is the fact that some of the senior agents were absolutely correct, that the agents who were on the press plane were drinking. They were doing a lot of drinking. As a matter of fact, several agents became inebriated. Now, the importance of that was that the press plane goes in front of Air Force One and it lands, and the agents on the press plane are the ones who are supposed to form the circle around the president as he alights from Air Force One. So now having agents who were inebriated or unfit to protect the president was very critical. And I noticed that on the way to the hotel where we were living after the president's plane had landed, Air Force One had landed, I noticed that there was a lot of racist talk. And there was conversations concerning niggers in the car. They actually used the word to me present. I didn't say anything at the particular time because I knew that a couple of agents were inebriated, and that if I had spoken up, I believe that it could have exploded into something that would have been very deadly for either them or I, myself. So when we arrived at the hotel in Hyannisport, we went into the room, and Harvey Henderson, who was the lead agent for the detail on my ship, he and another agent went out in town and bought a case of beer, whiskey, wine, you name it, they had it. Scotch, they had it, and brought it into the room. Now, during the stay there, as we were protecting President Kennedy over at Nantucket Sound and Hyannisport, Cape Cod, I heard a conversation between the agents. And they were discussing whether or not that they would give their life for the president if an assassination attempt would be made. And it was a very dreadful discussion that I overheard, where I heard Harvey Henderson and another agent, two other agents, said that if an assassination attempt were made on the president, that they would let it happen. They would not protect the president. Now, this was highly serious to me. And it substantiated what some of the other agents had said back in Chicago before I had joined the White House detail, that some of the agents surrounding President Kennedy was indeed unfit for the detail. However, none of them had stood up or made any complaint or brought it to the attention of the chief of the Secret Service, U.E. Bowman. So in noticing all of the activity, the drinking, the playing around, the horsing around with different women, bringing women into the hotel room, using the Secret Service automobile for pleasure rather than for work, I thought that it was such neglect and that it was such shame and a lack of a respect for duty, the respect for the president, and respect for the duty that we were there for, and that something should be done about it. So when we arrived back in Washington, D.C. on July the 5th of 1961, I was sent by James Rowley, who was the chief of the Secret Service detail over the White House. I was sent to talk with Huey Bauman, who was then the chief of the entire Secret Service. I explained to Chief Bauman what I had heard, what I had witnessed, and told the chief of the United States Secret Service that unless changes were made on the detail of the Secret Service, the personnel detail of the Secret Service, guarding the president, that if an assassination attempt were made, the president would be assassinated because the agents would not be in any condition to protect President Kennedy. Chief Bauman told me that he would discuss it with Chief Rowley, who was over the head of the Secret Service detail. I don't know if he ever did. I asked to be relieved of the duty of the detail because I had a conversation with Ms. Harvey Henderson, who was the chief of the detail so far as my ship was concerned, special agent in charge. Harvey Henderson told me that I was a nigger. I was born a nigger. You're gonna die a nigger. You'll never be anything else but a nigger. So I that's what the chief of the detail told me to my face in front of several other agents. So when I went back to Washington, D.C. on July the 5th, I discussed that with Huey Bauman, the racism and the drinking and the lack of duty and the lack of respect for the president. And as I said, I asked to be transferred back to Chicago, Illinois as a field agent. But I didn't let it go at that. Every chance I got, I wrote a memo to Chief Bauman confirming the conversation that we had. I don't know if he ever got it, because shortly thereafter, after July the 5th, Huey Bauman retired and Chief Rowley, James Rowley, took his place. And so that meant that Chief Rowley was privy to the information that I had given Chief Bauman. Now, I wasn't upset of that because I wanted the information to get back to Chief Rowley so that changes could be made. You understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
All right, now, what happened is this. I came back to Chicago and began investigating counterfeiting cases, check cases. But in the back of my mind, I continued to tell the special agent in charge of the Chicago office, the assistant special agent in charge, the inspection division, when they visited Chicago, I told them it's an assassination attempt were made on the president, that it would be successful. Of course, they blew me off. No one did anything or said anything except that I was a new agent, and of course everything looked serious to me, and that they had a lot of experience. They hadn't lost a president in 50 years or so, and blah, 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 on and on and on until November the 22nd, 1963. Now, to bring you up to date on before November the 22nd, 1963, we had many threats that were very serious and organized against the President Kennedy. We had in Miami, there was a group, and they were right-wingers, so-called right-wingers. And the leader of that group was a man named Miltier. who had associations with the Ku Klux Klan. We had an informant who knew Miltier and had a conversation with him, which conversation was recorded by the sheriff, Dade County. He turned that conversation over to the Secret Service, and that conversation was about the assassination of President Kennedy. The informant asked Miltier, well, how are you gonna kill the president? Miltier said that we're gonna put a person in a warehouse building or a tall building with a rifle with a telescopic sight. And that's the way we're gonna kill the president. Our informant asked Miltier, said, well, the Secret Service is gonna be guarding the president. Miltier says, don't worry about those guys. They'll be taken care of. And he says, we also have a patch to take the heat once that the president is killed. Also in Chicago now in 1963, both in March and November of 1963, we had an organization, Cuban organization, the DRE, and we had an informant within that organization, Homer Echeverria, who was a member of the organization and a resident of Chicago, Illinois, said President Kennedy is about to be assassinated, that we have the funds to do it, and it's going to happen. The informant reported that back to Joe Noonan, who was the agent who was handling that case of the threat against President Kennedy. So we had plenty of time and plenty of information concerning how the president was going to be killed and when the president was going to be killed. Yet, on November 22nd, 1963, Dallas, Texas, at 12 o'clock, he gets mortally wounded. Now, after that occurred, all hell broke loose in the Secret Service office in Chicago. I was called in along with other agents and were told not to discuss the president's security with anyone. And I saw evidence that the Secret Service were trying to cover up events that had occurred that we had knowledge on that was leading up to that period of the assassination of the president. And after that, the Warren Commission was organized by President Johnson, appointed by President Johnson. They were destroying reports and changing dates on the reports in order to cover up the laxity of the agents who were investigating the pre-assassination of President Kennedy here in Chicago. Now, the Warren Commission, having been appointed by President Johnson in 1965, January, they were in session. But one thing that I didn't know at the particular time, and that was that Kassenbach, who was the acting Attorney General in place of Bobby Kennedy, who took leave because his brother had just been assassinated, on December the 6th, Kassenbach wrote a memo to Bill Moyer, who was one of the aides to President Johnson. And that memo said that Lee Harvey Oswald had to be designated as the only assassin of President Kennedy. Now, that was very important because in my mind at that time was to go before the Warren Commission, ask permission to testify,